This is a book that is a somewhat personal and quirky book, but it's one person's look through history and through what people have said in the past to cull out things that have meaning that I think still have meaning in modern life. I collected sayings that I liked for my own use. And then as I got more into it, I began to collect them with the thought that this was something I could pass on to my children. And I ran across a college friend, and he saw the book, and he said, you know, this is pretty good. You ought to consider publishing it. And he knew an agent, and on it went from there. So my sort of ratty, handwritten old book has now been turned into this nice-looking thing. I started collecting quotes when I was working for Governor Sondland. And then when I went on to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Attorney General's Office and so forth, I kept adding to them. And the reason was twofold. One was to keep a record of things that meant a lot to me. The other was simply to keep a record of things that I thought would be useful in arguments and debates and discussions, to make points and things like that. So lawyers looking at this book will flip through it and see, you know, there are a lot of quotations from Supreme Court cases, and I try to assemble them into the same sort of packet so that you get the point and you can move on to other things. But there's a piece of this that was about being a better lawyer and advocate, as well as being a better person and citizen. In life, you don't always succeed, but you can try to. And in times of stress or when I'm questioning something, I fairly often go back and flip through the book, and or I try to remember something that was in it. And there are examples of courage and of heroism and of faith and of strength in adversity and of holding firm through difficult circumstances. And all of those things I think are useful in life, even if I don't always succeed at implementing them. The quote from Isaiah, "And the Lord said, who shall I send, and who shall go for us? Then said I, Lord, here I am, send me." I think the here I am, send me spirit is one that I was brought up with, and I try to show that as a principle that I care about and live by in my own life. I did want a resource that I could go back to that had things in it that meant something to me, and it still is that resource. I've used the quotes in speeches in the Senate when the Bush administration was trying to justify its use of torture. I used the quote from Winston Churchill about how, you know, it looks good at the beginning, but go down that road and it gets bad. And he talks about a staircase leading down, and it's brightly lit and carpeted at the top, and as you go down, the carpet ends and the treads fail, and eventually it crumbles beneath your feet. And that's a great image, and sometimes the right image can make the difference in an argument. I'm very, very exposed and engaged in Rhode Island's life, so, you know, things like our Revolutionary War General Nathaniel Greene saying, you know, I fight, I get beat, I rise up, and I fight again. That's a, you know, a good Rhode Island thing. The quote from the Touro Synagogue, the warden of the Touro Synagogue wrote a letter to George Washington asking that it should always be the policy of the United States to give to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. And Washington, with a politician's gift for good phrase, steals it out of Warden Satius's letter and writes it back to him, to the congregation. And those, and there are a number of others. Those are good Rhode Island history. Some of it's just a lot more personal. John Chafee, my predecessor in the Senate, was advised by his father Never tease the crocodile until you've crossed the stream. And that's something that I think if you're in legislative business, when you're working with somebody on something, you don't want to annoy them too much. You get your business done, and then you go on to whatever else you have to do. So there's a lot of Rhode Island history in here and a lot of my experience in Rhode Island here. I think one of the things about the book and its quotes that defines a truly American life is my sense that a truly American life includes being engaged as a citizen, being engaged as a voter, being engaged as a public voice, being engaged in office, being engaged in your community, however you choose to do it. I think it's very inherently American to see ourselves as citizens and see ourselves as having an active and full role in our community, our society, and our politics. And so a lot of these quotes focus on that relationship, the structure of government, how it works, its frustrations, its occasional moments of glory, what people who have spent a lot of time in it have thought and said about it. And I hope that the book encourages both a little bit of patience with our politics, but also a heightened engagement. I hope what sets mine apart is that it's not just a reference work. It's not the place where you go to look for a quote to open a speech. It's more something that somebody can flip through if they're thinking about issues in their life, if they're wondering about their engagement as citizens, if they're facing some suffering or uncertainty. And I think that the book, just because of the way it was selected, ends up having a bit of a voice of its own, whereas a regular reference book full of quotations, they come from, every different angle. I think there's kind of a flow or a theme to a lot of what's in this book. I put the comments in after the quotations, sometimes just to highlight the part of the quotation that I particularly liked, or sometimes to show why I thought it was important, in case somebody was wondering why it was in there. It also, I think, makes the book a little bit more personal because each quote comes with a little explanation. It's almost like, little gifts one by one from me rather than just, here's this array. I'd want a reader to take away from this book the sense that they have a lot to contribute and a richer or more nuanced understanding of how kind of unusual and special our political process is. Here we are in a sort of loggerheads moment, and these situations repeat themselves through time, and you go back and think of people who've been in them before. And there's a quote from a very wily minister of France who said, "One ought not to be obstinate, unless one ought to be, and then one ought to be unshakable." And I think that's a good phrase for the moment that we're in right now, and I hope that the president, where he ought to be obstinate, will be unshakable. I still collect quotes, and I think I probably will the rest of my life, because you run across these things and they're just terrific, whether it's a window into a moment of history or a particularly well-phrased thought that has an emotional resonance to it. Those are good things to have on hand.